And I would like to welcome all of you to this presentation of seed collection for restoration from Kettle Moraine Land Trust. I'm going to jump right into our slide presentation. So if you'll give me just a moment to open up the slideshow. And can everyone see my slides? Well, I can't hear you because I've asked you to mute. Assuming you can see my slides, I will tell you once again that this presentation is on behalf of the Kettle Moraine Land Trust. My name is Greg Reisky, and it is my pleasure to welcome you here this evening. We'll jump right in with some acknowledgements. I want to thank some of the people who have contributed content to this presentation. Notably, Kelly Schultz, who is a plant ecologist with the Forest Preserves of Lake County, Illinois, and the very extreme northeast corner of the state of Illinois. She had prepared a presentation along these lines and very graciously gave me permission to use quite a number of her slides and photographs in this presentation. I also want to thank the folks at Project Wingspan and the Pollinator Partnership. They have been training volunteers in seed collection throughout the Midwest, and we'll be talking a little bit more about their efforts and Kettle Moraine Land Trust's involvement with Project Wingspan and opportunities for volunteers to get involved. I also want to thank Lori Ryan, who is the plant ecologist for the McHenry County Conservation District, McHenry County in Illinois, adjacent to Lake County. There will be some photos of their seed processing operation. They have a relatively sophisticated setup for that, and it's interesting to look at what they have going on there. The photograph, in fact, on this slide is from one of their volunteer seed collection outings from just a few years ago. So I want to mention this at the beginning of the presentation, and we'll come back to it at the end. So if you are interested and available for any of these opportunities and you don't get a chance to jot everything down or record the dates and times and locations, we'll come back to this at the end of the presentation. But Kettle Moraine Land Trust has 3 seed collection outings for volunteers scheduled for the next several weeks. On Wednesday of next week at Price Park Conservancy, which is near Elkhorn, Wisconsin, in the afternoon from 1 till 4. And this is a Project Wingspan collection outing. That's relevant because Project Wingspan has its own requirements for volunteers. If you'd like to volunteer with Project Wingspan, they simply ask that you undergo their video training program. It's free, online, it's not too time consuming, and it's well worthwhile. Following the first Price Park outing, the next Saturday, September 26th, as part of Gathering Water's Land Trust Days series of events, we will be partnering with the Geneva Lake Conservancy for Harvest at Hackmatack. And this will be at the Turner Tract on County Highway H, just northwest of Genoa City, Wisconsin, in southern Walworth County. That's a drop-in program. You can show up anytime after 10. We'll wrap up around 1 p.m. And then once more at Price Park on Thursday, October 1st, from 1 till 4. And I find that afternoon collection outings are ideal because it offers an opportunity for the dew to burn off. You don't want to be collecting the seed while things are very wet out there. It's best to collect dry seed. When you bring it in wet, it has to otherwise be dried, or it will have a propensity to mold or otherwise lose its viability. So one of the critical things with regard to the collection of native plants is that it be done in a sustainable manner. And I cannot emphasize this enough. And this is what we call seed collection ethics. It is important that we not damage the population that we are seeking to restore. And certainly seeds are produced typically in large numbers by most plants, but not always, and not in every station. So it's important not to collect all the seed that you find. Now, a general rule of thumb, and again, this can vary according to the owner of the property on which the collection is taking place. Every agency or other landowning organization or individual has the right to establish their own rules. So when we say we offer some guidelines here, these are just very general and subject to, specific requirements of any given site. So the idea is, if it's a perennial plant, don't collect more than 50% of what the population has to offer up at a given time. If you're dealing with biennials, maybe around 20%. With annuals, you really don't want to go much more than 10%. Again, an annual isn't going to be there next year unless its seed takes root and becomes established. It's also important to take only what is ripe. For the most part, there are very few of our native plant seeds that will ripen after harvesting. If it's not already ripe at the time of taking, it's better to leave it on the plant, because most of our species require that metabolic exchange between the other plant tissue and the seed tissue, and that has to be complete. It has to reach maturation before that seed is ready to release from the plant. And we'll use that as a guideline in some instances in terms of determining whether seed is ripe or not. So another important factor is what we're calling source cycling. And that's just a shorthand of saying that we don't want to stress any particular population or any particular location too much. You don't want to go back to the well too many times until it runs dry. You want to give an opportunity for the site to recharge, for it to replenish its supply of genetic material. And a quick word about genetic diversity. Some agencies, some property owners suggest that seed brought onto a site for the purposes of restoration should be as local as possible, that there will be local genotypes that are peculiar to an area or to a particular soil type or hydrological regimen, and that these local genotypes are of significance when it comes to trying to restore a natural area to its original ecological functionality. But I think it makes sense to balance the genetic purity of a stand with genetic diversity. So I'm not saying that we want to bring in genetic material from 2 states away, but I'm not saying that every restoration has to limit its reach to, say, a 30-mile radius. Ecological restoration is extremely site-specific, and it's generally best to confer with several experts and obtain guidance from a variety of sources when determining what your collection plan is going to look like. And I have always found it advisable to confer with the property owner or landowning agency to determine what their requirements are, what their objectives are, and how to proceed in a manner that balances that diversity and purity. So, sustainable, ethical, again, we want to be in this for the long haul. So, seed collection. It can take many forms. This is not what we have in mind. This is one of our volunteers who has come out of the woods covered with stick seed. Here's a picture of another volunteer, his brother. And this mass of sticky seeds that each of them came out of the woods with was no accident. They were intentionally removing this plant from the route of a trail that we're going to be installing at this particular preserve. But it does illustrate that there are certain kinds of seeds that will cling to your clothing, even to your skin. And it's important to be well aware of our surroundings when we're out and about in these natural areas so that we end up collecting what we aim to, and very importantly, not contaminating our collection with weed seeds or with insects or with other components that we don't intend to collect. So just a word about collection bags. There are a variety of different systems and methods that are employed out there. There are mechanical devices, some of which can be mounted on the front of a tractor, some of which can be worn like a harness, that essentially operate much like an agricultural combine to knock the seed off of the plant, collect it in a bin, sift it, and eventually sort to a certain extent. Absent that level of mechanized sophistication, a simple bag and hand collecting is essentially what we're going to be talking about here today. Now, in the photo on the left, the volunteer has what is marketed as a tree planting bag. These are available online through forestry supply outlets. They're intended for use in remote areas where a planter, an individual person, carries this bag out there and it's full of bare root seedlings. And they'll use a dibble stick to be able to very quickly make a quick cut into the earth, drop that bare root seedling in place, and then step to close that V-shaped opening that the dibble stick has created. We find that they make excellent seed collection bags because they're a very durable vinyl. They come with a belt attachment, so it's got a web belt that you can literally clasp around your waist, holding the bag in front of you. They're waterproof, so if you do get out on a dewy morning or if you get caught in the rain, unlike, say, a paper bag, you won't be as compromised. There are a variety of handmade versions of collection bags that are out there. Wisconsin DNR has a nice system where they're using, I believe, Tyvek, and again, a shoulder strap or belt system, and they make their own. I have worked with volunteer groups that have, we've got a good seamstress on the crew. It's wonderful. Somebody who can sew, can pick up a bolt of parachute material, ripstop nylon, and can sew a simple bag, and then using a coat hanger or other similar durable wire, create an opening at the top of that bag that remains open and makes it easy to collect. You can use a simple system of binder clips and a slip knot on a clothesline to be able to put an over-the-shoulder carrier that you can adjust the height of, so that you don't have to bend over, stoop over. You can collect at waist height or at shoulder height by adjusting the length of your shoulder strap. Paper bags have been used for years, with or without a wire frame to hold the bag open. The disadvantage of paper bags, naturally, is that once they get wet, you get into a dewy situation or a light sprinkle even, and you can end up losing what you've collected through a torn bag weakened by moisture. In the era of COVID-19, this fall, the collection that we do at the Kettle Moraine Land Trust, we're asking people to bring their own collection bags. And they'll collect a certain species, they'll bring it back to a central station, and they'll be able to empty their bag into a larger bin or container, and then take their bag home with them again. And for that purpose, a typical reusable grocery shopping bag is quite well suited. So the photo on the right is just a typical reusable canvas bag, and that would be well suited to a volunteer seed collection outing. So getting out in the field is what it's all about. Certainly that's the attraction. That's what draws volunteers to come out and participate in restoration outings. The photo on the left shows a volunteer crew with McHenry County Conservation District. And they are in a dense stand of silky rye. Now, in the foreground, in front of the person wearing the red parka, you see bottlebrush grass. But most of what you're seeing a little bit shorter in stature with the nodding heads in the nice tawny straw-colored stand in the foreground and on into the background is silky wild rye. And if you look at the photo on the right, it's the crew from the Youth Conservation Corps working in the Hackmatack National Wildlife Refuge. This was probably right on the Illinois-Wisconsin state line a few years ago. And you can see they're using the tree planting bags. What's hard to make out is in the foreground, and they're standing in the midst of the field of, you can see some thin, dark brown stems. That's all shooting star. It's a very dense stand of shooting star, Dodecathion media or Primula media, depending on which books you follow. So both of these illustrations, both of these photographs illustrate a single point, and that is you want to collect from areas where there is an abundance of the plant.
Hi, honey. Hi. Are you happy now?
Is there a question there? Apparently not. Okay, so yes, both of those stations have an abundance of the target species that is being collected. Once again, the landowning agency or organization or the private property owner can determine what guidelines to follow. With Project Wingspan, for example, there is a standard that you want to have at least 50 plants of the targeted species in order for that site to be eligible for a collection. Again, it'll vary site to site, owner to owner, but again, just the need to employ ethical practices. So what I'd like to do now is introduce you to a gallery of a variety of characters, some whimsical, some less so, but I'd like to introduce you to the kinds of seeds that are produced by our native plants. And we'll start with a group that we can call the VELCRO seeds. And I've always heard that the invention of VELCRO was inspired by seeds like these, clinging burr-like seeds that get stuck to your socks and your shoelaces, and heaven forbid you reach over and get your head stuck in some of them. I know people who have gotten sudden haircuts as a result of that. So here you see three native genera that we don't want you to collect. You know, you don't need to collect these. They do just fine on their own through a process that ecologists call zookery, which is simply the animal dispersal of plant propagules. So the Bidens, the tick seed sunflowers, the Asteraceae, the enchanter's nightshade, and Hecalia, stickseed. Those, yeah, they're going to get around just fine, and I wouldn't add them to our collection list. But not all Velcro seeds are quite that aggressive. There are others that we may, in fact, want to collect. For example, some of the Desmodium species. And some of those, they're moving into Hylodesmum, is a different genus. Some people don't want to collect these. They've got enough of it on their property, and it's, again, spreading on its own just fine. So again, this is site by site, case by case. But Illinois tick trefoil, showy tick trefoil, even the pointed leaf tick trefoil, these may all be suitable for certain restorations and far more desirable than, say, garlic mustard or sweet clover or any of the invasive species. So even though they are quasi-aggressive clingers, they may find their way into a restoration seed mix. You can actually tell the species apart within some of these tick trefoils according to their seed shape. So on the left, the seeds are likely Illinois tick trefoil, though they could be Desmodium canadensis, don't quote me. The ones on the right are Desmodium glutinosum, or again, what had been renamed Hylodesmum glutinosum, the pointed leaf tick trefoil. Species on the left is going to occur in a prairie. Species on the right is going to occur in the woodland. Agrimony is one that surprised me, but I understand that it's very difficult to find agrimony seed on the market. So some landowning agencies and others are looking for Agrimonia gryposepala, or possibly the beaked agrimony, as well as the tall. And again, the clue there is that if the seeds stick to you, chances are they're right. They're releasing from the plant as nature intended. So past the Velcro seeds, now on to the cone heads. These would include the purple coneflower, Echinacea. There are two species that occur locally here in Walworth County, Echinacea pallida and Echinacea purpurea. They both look similar when they are ripe. So if you want to tell the difference, it's probably better to have a good look at them while the leaves are readily visible. The much broader leaf of the Echinacea purpurea and the narrower leaf of the Echinacea pallida. It's a spiky seed head. So it's one that you want to clip off with pruning shears and throw the whole seed head into your bag. Don't try to, separate the seed from the cone out in the field, unless you've got some pretty tough gloves. Similarly, the Susans, the black-eyed Susan, brown-eyed Susan, Rudbeckia hirta, Rudbeckia triloba, the showier ones, Speciosa, Laciniata, all of those in the Rudbeckia genus tend to be often used in restoration projects. And, you can pretty well see the similarity between the seed head when it's ripe and what it looked like when it was still in flower, when it was essentially the disc flowers in the center of the composite. So these are species that are relatively easy to tell, to identify in the field, even when past bloom. And again, learning to do a little bit of cadaver botany or a little bit of what they call ugly flower botany, learning to identify these plants when they are past full bloom, when they're senescent, that's a relatively important skill for the restorationist. So seeds are ripe when the color is gone. And again, snip the heads and take the seed head and all and the stem stump, put that all in the bag. They'll be processed later. But there are also crumbly cone heads. For example, the yellow cone flowers, Retibita pinnata, and the purple and white prairie clovers, Dahlia candida and Dahlia purpurea. These, because they're crumbly when they're ripe, can be taken by hand. You can simply grasp the cone, crush it gently between your fingers, and the seeds will fall right off. The Retibita pinnata has a wonderful aroma. The ripe seeds smell better than the flowers. I have often enjoyed driving around in my car with a paper bag full of Retibita pinnata and a paper bag full of Monarda fistulosa, and the coneflower and the bergamot together make a wonderful air freshener for your car. But then you get spiders climbing around on your rearview mirror. The dahlia species remain soft, so that when they crumble in your fingers, you don't need to wear gloves. They come off very easily. That's a good one for beginners, for people who are new to this process and you don't want to scare them off, or you've got families and you've got younger children. If they can be trained to identify, to collect just that species, that's a good one for kids to go after. So strip and crumble by hand. Other cone heads, the sunflowers in the genus Helianthus, the so-called oxeye sunflower or false sunflower, Heliopsis, Helianthoides, and then the various Silphium species, such as the compass plant that you see pictured here. Those are all good candidates for collection because they're fairly easy to find and fairly easy to get to. And they're all in the Asteraceae family, the composites. And again, this is probably well known to most of you, but I just want to go through the physiology of composite flowers. They call them composites because what you see as a single daisy-like flower or sunflower is in fact a composite of many florets, many miniature flowers. And they're typically of two types in the composite family. In the center, or on the outer edge, on the left, the lower photo there, the outer edge are what we call ray flowers or strap flowers or florets. In the center of the head are what we call the disc flowers. So this photo is all of one flower head, one composite, but you can see the flower shapes are rather markedly different. You've got the long yellow strap or ray of the flower circled at the bottom, and then you've got a short stubby kind of flower without that petal-like appearance in the center itself. So it's a large family, the Asteraceae. It includes sunflowers, like I said, the Silphiums, daisies, dandelions, chicory, thistles, the asters of fall, blazing stars, and some of them have only disc flowers, and some of them have only ray flowers, and most of them have both. Now, what's interesting to me is how it is that the Silphiums are in a different genus unto themselves, and they are not part of the Helianthus genus. Most of you have probably eaten sunflower seeds, commercially grown sunflower seeds, or you've used the black oil sunflower seeds in your bird feeders, for example. And you've probably seen those great, immense, tall sunflowers, fields of them sometimes, with the bright yellow ray flowers around the perimeter and the dark, large head of the disc flowers. Well, in the genus Helianthus, in the sunflowers, it is the disc flowers, the disc florets, that are fertile. The ray flowers around the perimeter that are showy and petal-like are sterile. So they produce no seed. All of the sunflower seeds come from the head, come from the center, come from the disc florets. That situation is reversed in the genus Silphium. The ray flowers around the perimeter are fertile and produce the seeds, whereas the disc flowers in the center are sterile and produce no seeds. So in the photo on the left, you can see that the sunflower head is where the seeds are produced. And in the photo on the right, you've got Silphium species. And hopefully you can see that here in the center, these florets were sterile, but around the perimeter is where the seeds are located, here around the perimeter. And our local Silphium species include prairie dock, compass plant, rosinweed, cup plant. So again, there around the outer perimeter is where you collect the seeds. And again, you want to collect sunflowers and Silphiums when the seeds have turned brown. Okay, on to another seed type. We're going to call these shakers. And this particular group of shakers we'll call beaks. So Chilone glabra, or turtle head, is the classic smiley Pac-Man beak. The seeds are encased within a capsule. Capsule is the correct botanical term, but beaks are a way of talking about it. It looks like as soon as that beak is open, the seeds are ready for release. And again, that's your signal that this species is right. Penstemon is another genus, the beard tongues that bear capsules that are like beaks. So here you see the beak-like structure of the right capsules of Penstemon digitalis. The shooting stars also. So here you see the Dodecatheon media. The capsules have turned brown. They have spread the tips of the capsules. They folded back. And with the shooting stars, they end up being wind dispersed because those cups remain held on a vertical stem like a goblet. They don't nod over. They rely on being knocked about by passing animals or a good stiff wind to distribute the tiny little seeds that are found in those capsules. So the key for all of these beak-like shakers is to wait for the capsule to break open and then hope you can get there before the seeds all get shaken out. So Veronicastrum virginicum, Culver's root. We might not realize that this is also a beak-like structure, that these are capsules. They're so small that we don't necessarily recognize it. But when you look at them closely here under some magnification, you can see that yes, those are all individual capsules from the wand-like raceme of flowers that occurred earlier in the year. The seeds are tiny, just like the capsules. As the note says here, it can take 800,000 of these little seeds to make up just 1 ounce. So if you're purchasing seed mixes and you wonder why Veronicastrum virginicum is so expensive, it's because an ounce of seed is a lot of seed. So again, the capsule is likely to change color, and you do want to wait until that capsule opens up before you collect. There's another kind of shaker out there. We're going to call them salt shakers. And these are capsules that are papery. They're paper thin, and they start to decompose along the edges, and they end up being perforated. And the seeds literally fall out these little pinholes along the sides of the capsule. much like a shaker of salt will release its grain-like contents when you turn it upside down or shake it. So campanula, now campanulastrum, the tall bellflower, the lobelia species, here Indian tobacco, lobelia inflata, are two of these so-called salt shakers. And again, the pod starts to turn wan in color, it turns pale, and you can see how paper thin the membrane is. And that's a pretty good indication, especially when you start to get these little perforations like you see here. You get that little hole in the side and you know that it's ready to release ripe seed. Also categorized, if you will, as shakers are mints. And we've got a number of species in the mint family. Monarda fistulosa is shown here. Photo behind is still in flower. The photo below shows the seed heads and a spray of seeds at its base. Mountain mint, pycnanthemum, has a similar structure in more minute form. And it's interesting the way the mints tend to bloom. The Monarda, for example, blooms first from the center of the flower head. And then as those flowers senesce, then the outer rim, the florets around the outer edges, start to go. So later in the season, as you see here in the photograph, it almost looks like a balding gentleman who has a wreath of hair around the perimeter, but is bald on top. And that's just the way that they bloom. On the other hand, you look at species like obedient plant, Physosthesia, and it blooms from the bottom up. So the lower flowers are the first to bloom, and then the upper flowers come a little bit later. So if you look, for example, at this spike on the far left, these capsules are done blooming, but up at the top, these flowers are not yet done. So it's important to watch your timing. So with the Monarda, you can look for that bald spot to see when the seeds are starting to ripen. And with the Physosthesia, you may be able to collect from the bottom of the plant before you collect from the top of the plant. And again, if you look inside the capsules of the obedient plant, you'll see that the seeds themselves are dark. And with the obedient plant, you only have 4 seeds per capsule. So they're fairly large by comparison to some of these other beak-like seed structures that we've seen. So the seeds will come out of the capsule very easily, and they'll usually have turned dark, brown, or even blackish. And now on to the fluffies. We're all familiar with dandelions from childhood. These wind-dispersed, parachuted seeds. That little fluffy appendage is what we call pappus. That's the botanical term for it. And the pappus allows the seed to become airborne. So these are wind dispersed. And other than the milkweeds, generally speaking, it's the plants in the composite family, the Asteraceae, that will bear this kind of structure. It's easy to collect them, but it's difficult to identify the species late in the season when they are ripe. So if you're not sure if you're dealing with a weedy species of goldenrod or a conservative species of goldenrod, it may be better to hold off unless you know. And very often you've got multiple flowers on a single plant. So some of them are ripe, others are still just starting to bloom. You see that in the asters, for example. And some of these will hold on to their seeds for a long time, and it can be a little frustrating. If you look at this photo down here, for example, bottom row, second from the left, this looks to me like ironweed. Vernonia is the genus. And if you look at this set of flowers here, the pappus is turning color. It's no longer white, it's starting to turn tawny. And you think, okay, that's possibly ripe, but it's still clustered tightly in the base. Here you see they've opened up quite a bit, and they've spread out. And the key thing with the Vernonia species is you can pinch the fluff at the tip and tug gently. If those seeds don't release immediately, if they want to hang on, don't take it yet. Let it go. It's not ready. So, as Kelly would put it, their seeds are ready when they're poofed. I don't think that's a technical scientific term, but it certainly works. So you can collect the whole stem at that time. You can shake the stem over your collection bag. And many of the seeds and fluff will fall directly into the bag. Some will drift away on the breeze, and hopefully it's not too windy a day, or you'll not collect as much as you're aiming to. But I never worry about stuff that misses the bag, because although I may not be as efficient in my collection, I know that I'm returning ripe seed to that site. And like I say, we want to be careful not to overly collect. So there are some species that look somewhat alike and may be closely akin. For example, these Joe Pye weeds. On the left, you've got Eutrochium maculatum, spotted Joe Pye weed. On the right, you've got Eutrochium purpureum, purple Joe Pye weed. Now, they've drawn a little diagram over the flower heads here, the flowering heads. You can see it's sort of triangular shaped with the spotted Joe Pye. It's more or less flat on top and slightly angled beneath. Whereas with the spotted, or with the purple Joe Pye, it's more of a dome shape. It'll have a higher dome, rounded, and generally a larger set of flowers, paler in color. They both will have whorled leaves along the stem. The stem of the spotted Joe Pye weed is dotted, and hence the name, spotted Joe Pye weed. But one of the critical distinctions between these two similar species is habitat choice. The spotted Joe Pye is going to be growing in a wetland area, very likely in full sun, whereas the purple Joe Pye weed is going to be growing in a woodland or savanna with a partial sun and partial shade. So it's helpful if you're sure that you're dealing with Eutrochium species, but you're just not sure if it's one or the other, mark down the habitat. Offer whatever additional site data you can add when you submit your seed for processing. Or if you're collecting on your own, at your own property, for example, put the seed back in a similar habitat to where you found it. So, the maculatum is going to do better in a moist, sunny environment, while the purpureum is going to tolerate some shade and prefer a drier soil. So again, if you're not sure, but you have enough information to make an informed decision, just make sure you keep good records, because if you're going to be planting these seeds in the spring, you may not remember so well what you were doing or where you were when you collected it in the fall. So moving on to the milkweeds out of the Asteraceae into the Asclepiadaceae, or what some call the Apocynaceae. Milkweeds are certainly attractive for collection. They're fairly easy to identify, at least to genus. But I'll give you a few tips here on how to tell a couple of vaguely similar species apart. So for example, here we've got the common milkweed, Asclepias syriaca, on the left, and we've got prairie milkweed, Asclepias sullivantii, on the right. They both have pale purple, pinkish flowers, and all milkweeds will exhibit the same flower shape. You know, that the straps that hang down, the corona above, sort of hood and strap structure. Some of them have similar leaf structure or pattern. For example, these two, the common milkweed is going to have fuzzy leaves, especially the undersides. They're going to be hairy, whereas the sullivantii is going to have waxy leaves, smooth, they'll be glabrous. The seed pods are superficially similar in terms of size and shape, but the common milkweed has these soft hooks or barbs studding the entire surface of the seed pod, whereas the sullivantii, the prairie milkweed, lacks those hooked protuberances. Now, it's important to recognize the difference between the two because common milkweed is just that. It's very common, and it's often somewhat weedy, depending on the station, depending on the environment. It's still a valued plant for monarch butterflies especially, but also a nectar plant for a variety of other insects. But if you're working with a prairie restoration, you may not want to be introducing a weedier species like common milkweed when you're trying to support a population of prairie milkweed. So whereas common milkweed has a coefficient of conservatism, which ranks the fidelity of a species to a narrow ecological niche, it ranks 0 or 1. It occurs in an abundance of different ecological stations. Whereas Asclepias sullivantii, the prairie milkweed, would rank as an 8 out of 10. So it exhibits fidelity to a fairly narrow ecological niche. So it's important to know your species when you're collecting. Another pair of milkweeds that bear similar looking pods, but exist in radically different environments, Asclepias incarnata, the swamp milkweed, or rose milkweed as it's called in the seed trade nowadays, compared to Asclepias tuberosa, which is the butterfly milkweed. They both have seed pods that are held upright, the pointy end upward. They are of similar size and shape, generally speaking, but the Asclepias incarnata will grow much taller, generally speaking. The tuberosa will grow closer to the ground. And the swamp milkweed has waxy pods. The surface is smooth and a little bit waxy, whereas the butterfly milkweed would have downy seed pods, like a peach fuzz. So the texture is decidedly different. The height is different. And then finally, the habitat is different. So Asclepias tuberosa, butterfly weed, is going to grow in dry environments. It prefers dry prairie, whereas the Asclepias incarnata, the swamp milkweed, is aptly named. It prefers a wetland environment, wet prairies, sedge meadows, and marsh edges, margins. All right, another group of seed dispersal techniques includes what we might call the ballistic group. These are plants that physically propel their seeds at some distance from the parent plant. They literally are spring-loaded and will send the seeds flying. They catapult the seeds away. And some of these, it's been recorded, have been able to jettison their seed a distance of some 30 feet from the parent plant. So it's a pretty remarkable mechanism. The first one on the list here, impatiens. These are the jewel weeds, Impatiens capensis, Impatiens pallida. You can see that's what's illustrated here. This is Impatiens capensis, the orange jewel weed with its spotted hood-like structure. And these are the seed pods forming. And they're slender now, they are nowhere near ripe, but as they swell, as they begin to expand, they start to look like tiny little cucumbers on the stem. You can go up to a really ripe one and just poke it, just touch it a little bit or squeeze it gently between the fingers and the springs explode and the seeds go flying. Do that for a child and it will sit there giggling and doing that over and over until it runs out of seed pods. It's a lot of fun, actually. So impatiens, the jewel weeds, our geranium, our wild geraniums, Geranium maculatum is a good example. Crane's bill, they call it sometimes. And the seed pod is pointed like the bill of a crane until it releases its seed. And then as the capsule explodes, portions of it peel back and you can always tell if it's spent its seed, it's blown open. Our violets, our phlox, our prairie petunia, New Jersey tea, flowering spurge, all of these have ballistic seeds. Some of our legumes do, and also some of our mustards. So the key to collecting the seeds in the ballistic group is to get the timing right. Because if you collect too soon, the seed's not going to be ripe enough. You have to get it just before it explodes, just before it escapes the plant. So there are a couple of ways going about that. One is to set up a mesh hood over the seed, over the flower head, the seed head. And that way, when it does expel the seeds, it'll be caught in the mesh. You can use a cheesecloth bag, you can use, like a nylon stocking, anything that is breathable, but will catch the seed and not allow it to fall out. Now, that can be a little time consuming. You need to go out in advance. You need to tie an individual bag on each individual seed head, or flower head, I should say. But the advantage is you've captured everything. Or most everything out of that particular plant's production. The alternative method is a little less time consuming, but you need to do your homework and you need to get out into the field probably several times because you're going to spot a
We will be going over how to join a Zoom meeting. We've got a couple options, but we'll go through the first one by...
Sorry about that. Anyway, getting out into the field, you have to learn when it looks like it's about to be ready. For example, the sequence on the left here shows a violet in full flower. It shows the seed pod forming and it's nodding over. It's got that crook in it. It's not ready yet. Then it starts to stand up straight. Now it's ready for picking, because it won't be but another day or two until that capsule splits open and the seeds are going to be falling out. And then similarly, I mentioned the crane's bill, the geranium. Here it is in flower. And here you can see the seed pods, the crane's bills pointing upward, and they're green. And now you see that upward pointing crane's bill and it's turned a dark brown, almost black. That's ready. It says pick me, because in the next photo, as you can see, the bracts have curled back, the capsule has exploded, and the seed has been expelled. So if you know your plants really well, you can collect them when they're ripe, but before they're released. And otherwise, put a mesh bag over them. And the mesh bag, by the way, also works for hazelnuts. It can be difficult to collect hazelnuts because the squirrels love them. You know, they're nutritious, they're sweet, and the squirrels tend to collect them about a day or two before they ripen. So if you can put a mesh bag over them, you might be able to get to them when they're ripe, because the squirrels won't. So again, you look for changes in color, you look for changes in texture, in position, and the more time you spend in the field making observations like this, the better your chances of being able to anticipate when the seed is going to be ripe and when it's going to be released. Okay, we've got one more group of seeds to look at. These are what we call mama's boys. And we call them that simply because they hang out at home for a long time. Long after you think they've come of age, they're still hanging on to the parent plant. For example, the Zizia aurea is what you see here on the right. That's one that blooms in the spring and on into the summer, but the seeds are only just ripening now, and they've been green on the plant for a long time. So some of the groups that are listed here, you know, Zizia is the golden Alexanders, the meadow parsnip. Cicuta is the water hemlock group, and Oxypolis is cowbane. Cium is water parsnip, and Heracleum is cow parsnip. All of these tend to hang on to their seeds for a long time. Those in the carrot family or parsley family. So again, color is a good indicator, and also, do the seeds come readily off the plant? If the seed wants to hang on, it's not ready. Those in the lily family also. With the lilies, you'll find flower parts and seeds in groups of 3 or 6. With the Liliums, you've got a capsule typically pointing upward. With the iris, you've got this capsule that looks almost like a tiny, tiny banana. And when its seeds ripen, the capsule splits, and the seeds themselves look like little lozenges. You know, they're about a 1/4 inch thick and roundish, flat on either end or slightly concave. And then with the onions, the alliums, when you see a head like this, you may not notice that it's flowering in groups of 3s, but look, take a look at this capsule. You can see the 3 seeds when the capsule is not quite yet ripe. So once again, the seeds should strip easily from the stem, and they should exhibit a darker color. So I see we're running on in time, so I'm going to zip through the remainder of the slides now that we've gone through the gallery of the taxonomy of seed types and dispersal mechanisms. So again, photo on the left, purple Joe Pye weed. Again, that looks ready to collect. And I know that a number of landowning agencies in the region no longer add purple Joe Pye weed into their savanna seed mixes, simply because it gets in there on its own because it's wind-borne, and it can be a little aggressive in the early stages of restoration. So if you're going to use that plant, if you're going to collect from that plant, do so sparingly. And then on the right, bottlebrush, that's one of those, any of the grasses for the most part are fairly easy to collect. It can usually be done by hand. When collecting grasses, be watchful of the color, because often they'll look ripe. The awns will be tawny, you know, those bristles at the tip. But take a look down at the base. Take a look near where the seed actually connects to the stem. If that's still green, it's probably not ready. All right, just a couple of quick items about seed processing. This can be done by hand. It can be as simple as pushing the seeds through a screen, and the coarse material will stay on top. The finer material will drop through the screen. You can use a succession of screens, some coarse, some fine, and just know what your seed is. You know, sometimes you're collecting the seed on top of the screen. Sometimes you're collecting the chaff on top of the screen and the seed is falling down into the box below. But it's simpler to do by hand, but there's also a variety of processing equipment out there. This particular unit uses a series of screens, and you can see one of them laying here in the machine. This rack behind has screens of many different sizes, different apertures, different shaped openings. And then what you do is you pour the seed into a hopper at the top of the machine, and the machine shakes it. And it shakes it, and stuff falls through the screen, and other stuff stays on top, and then it goes out to different chutes and sorts. When you're using equipment like that, personal protective equipment, PPE, is important. So I like to point out that we were wearing masks before wearing masks was cool. And then on the right, you see some clean seed. This is what they call in the trade PLS, which stands for pure live seed. Seed that's collected can end up in a greenhouse production for plugs that can be transferred into the field, or the seed can be collected for sowing directly on the ground. This particular greenhouse production is the native plant nursery, Mason State Nursery, which is run by the Illinois Department of Natural Resources and is in use today for Project Wingspan. Speaking of which, Project Wingspan is a landscape scale project that is covering 9 states, from Minnesota to Arkansas and from Illinois to Pennsylvania. It's part of the Pollinator Partnership, which is headquartered in San Francisco. But this Midwestern program is being funded by a NIFWIF grant. That's the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation, the charitable arm of the Fish and Wildlife Service. It's a 3-year program, and Kettle Moraine Land Trust is a core partner of Project Wingspan. And you can check them out online if you'd like to learn more. The 3-year program was originally slated 2018 to 2021, but we've gotten an extension to broaden our reach into Arkansas and Minnesota and extend the program into the spring of 2022. So we've got 2 work days, volunteer restoration outings coming up with Project Wingspan at one of the Walworth County parks that Kettle Moraine Land Trust has adopted as steward. So Price Park Conservancy has a prairie restoration. These are photos from that prairie restoration taken earlier this year. Our 2 work days are September 23rd and October 1st. Both are afternoons, 1 p.m. to 4 p.m. But again, the key thing here is that if you're going to participate in a Project Wingspan seed collection, you have to go through their online training to be certified. It's easy to do, but it's a requirement. And that's determined by Project Wingspan. So I encourage you to follow up on that if you're interested in next week's collection. We'd love to have you on board. This is the set of species that were amongst the target species identified by Project Wingspan that we had noted at the prairies at Price Park. It's a nice long list. So we have a variety of species that are going to be available to us depending on what's ripe next week. Again, it depends on ground truthing. It depends on, where there are 50 or more species or 50 or more individuals of that species, and the ripeness is correct for collection. But there are 3 species that we've been asked to focus on, if at all possible. And they are the golden Alexanders, Zizia aurea, which should be ripening right now, and easy to collect, easy to identify. And then butterfly weed, Asclepias tuberosa. We looked at that in detail earlier. Again, a highly prized prairie flower for monarchs and for pollinators. It's good, nectar plant. And then finally, foxglove beard tongue, Penstemon digitalis. Again, one of those beaked capsule types of plants. So we've got a mama's boy, we've got a fluffy, and a beak to go for. So golden Alexanders, here's a photo that I took just this week of a plant from my own yard. And you can see that the seeds are ripening. They're turning a darker color. These will darken even a little bit more, and there's still a few green ones on there, but this is about ready for harvest. It likes calcareous soils, but it can go wet to dry. It's a plant of open woodlands, savannas, prairies, and it'll even grow in fens. And there are some 50 species of native bees that feed on this, according to Laura Rurica of Flora of the Chicago region. Butterfly weed, Asclepias tuberosa. Again, some people put that in the dogbane family, Echinacea. Some will say it's the Asclepiadaceae. So it depends on whether you're a lumper or a splitter. But it likes drier soils, and it's native to black oak savannas and sand prairies, and it will occasionally occur in mesic morainal prairies, such as those in Walworth County. And again, it feeds a lot of native insects, not just monarchs. And again, there's a look of the seed pod releasing its fluffies. Oh, and it's important to note, you collect the seed at the end of the pappus, not the fluffy pappus itself. I mean, you can get both, but don't collect the pappus without the seed attached. The beard tongues, Penstemon digitalis. This will go from wet to dry, middle dry, fine textured loam soils, prairies and savannas. And again, there are dozens of native insects that feed on this plant, as well as hummingbirds. All right, and then our next collection day will be a reprise of our Harvest at Hackmatack, which first took place just a year ago in Genoa City, Wisconsin. This, again, is part of the Land Trust Days series of events hosted or organized by Gathering Waters, the consortium of Wisconsin land trusts. This year, September 26th. And volunteers do not need to go through the Project Wingspan training to participate in this. We'll take family groups. We will, social distance ourselves. Again, bring your own collection bag, your own gloves, your own tools if you wish to use clippers or pruning shears or whatnot. Again, your own bag. And it's a drop-in program from 10 a.m. to 1 p.m. And you can find the Turner Tract of the Hackmatack National Wildlife Refuge just northwest of the city of Genoa City, Wisconsin, on Highway H, about a half mile out of town. And there's a U.S. Fish and Wildlife Refuge sign right there at the parking lot. So those are our opportunities, and we had an hour and a half set aside. I like to try to hold these closer to an hour. We're a little over that now. So I would like to allow people to unmute, and I'll give it a minute for people to jot down, if they wish to, any of the details regarding these 3 collection opportunities. And then I would happily take any questions if there are any.
Greg, there's a question in the chat room. What is the most effective means to germinate common milkweed?
Common milkweed will germinate well enough on its own. It should be stored. If it is not immediately put back into the soil after harvesting, and by immediately, I mean within a couple of weeks, it can be stored over winter with moist, cool stratification, essentially refrigerate it. And that should be sufficient for it to break dormancy. Otherwise, sowing in the fall is good because that will allow for the natural freeze-thaw cycle to break dormancy of the seed.
Okay, and we had another question about what was exactly the name of the YouTube channel for CAMLT. And
Yes.
if you go to YouTube and search for Kettle Moraine Land Trust, our official channel is the first one that comes up. We have another question from Kim, and maybe she could ask it because it's very technical. I'm not sure I'll get it right.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes,
Yes.
Kim, thank you.
Sure. I was just wondering if Liatris also needed moisture when it's stratified, along with being cold stratified.
That's a tricky question. It may depend on circumstances that I'm not aware of. I have found that it doesn't necessarily need to have that moisture. But I have also seen failures where maybe if it had been moist stratified, it might have done better. If you'd like, I can do a little more digging into that and see if I can get a more authoritative answer to you. My gut response is it shouldn't need that moisture, but I want to caution by saying, well, it may. So I'm sorry, that's a vacillation, but it's the best I can give you.
Oh, that's good. Thank you. I just had collected a lot of it, and I was wondering how I was going to get it moist to keep it over winter.
Well, generally speaking, the simplest method of moist, cool moist stratification is to mix a layer of moist sand, a layer of seed, cover that with another layer of moist sand. And that the sand will hold the moisture in a matrix so it doesn't puddle. And it raises the seed up enough that you'll get enough moisture circulating that you don't need to wet the seed itself, but put it in a moistened sand matrix.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome. I'm going to go ahead and stop recording.